Hello and welcome to Megan Smith's digital story for current and emerging technology within education. The question I chose to focus on was, does extended technology use affect physical and cognitive health in children? I chose this question because I really wanted to know if too much technology was a bad thing, focusing on students' behavior, students' mental health, students' physical health, and really how much is too much according to scientists, according to teachers, and according to my own observations of the children in my classroom. I want to know what were the side effects of the technology on children, as well as they were going to be not moving for long periods of times. Was I going to see an increase in frustration levels? And would there be any side effects of them staring at a computer screen or a smartboard screen for an extended period of time as they were being intensely stimulated and heavily engaged? Is there any negative side effects to these things? Prior to doing my observational study, I did some preliminary research, and it was interesting to find that appropriate technology use has been a worry for an extremely long time. The study I found was from 2002, so it's at least 16 years old, whereas they would have been studying the effects prior to 2002 in order to develop the study and create it and follow it and do it appropriately. So this is not a new thing. It is definitely something that's been on the minds of researchers and professionals for an extended period of time. And researchers have in fact noticed that the use of technology has resulted in a loss of sleep and interrupted sleep patterns for all children ages very young to even to adults like myself. We have seen a lot of researchers have seen a lot of sleep interruptions and a loss of sleep as people become addicted to technology and the stimulus it gives them and the feeling of connectedness that it gives them as well. For students, there has been an increase in ADHD diagnosis as children have been overly stimulated from video games and computer games and just imagery in general from technology, and then they don't have that post-technology outlet that is really, really important in order to have a healthy child. There is also an increase of sedentary children who are using technology and they're not moving, they're not doing their full body physical activities, and that has resulted in developmental delays. So students aren't growing properly, they're not forming the correct muscle groupings, and they're also having vision problems, and all of this is linked to poor cardiovascular health long term as they cannot see, they just want to sit, and they have significant health problems long term. Within my observational study, I was in a grade 2 classroom of 25 students where I observed their behavior before, during, and after the technology was used. This was specifically an observational only study as I had no permission from parents to conduct interviews with the children, so I just observed their classroom behaviors during routine and lesson-based activities. The technology that was used in this classroom was Smartboard, as seen in this picture, as well as Chromebooks, which each child had access to individually when we chose to use that in the lessons. I found that students displayed an increase in engagement to any activity that uses smartboards, whether it was math or art, or what in this case that is pictured is a interactive storybook reading from the Calgary Public Library, and as you can see, children are extremely engaged with the story, even more so than general read-alouds. It was very, very nice to see that they were so engaged with the stories and so engaged with the smartboard so that I could teach them different concepts throughout my practicum using it, so that I had an infinite cloner and math and all that sort of fun stuff. Was really, really great, but at the same time there were some negative drawbacks. I really focused on my observational study to be using a table, focusing on behaviors, like an observational table, focusing on their behaviors, like how long did they sit for, what were their behaviors before they sat down with the computers, during their computer use, and afterwards, as well as watching for any kind of significant eye rubbing, as if signaling that their eyes were starting to hurt or starting to become dry. What I did notice that students, many students, not all of them, but many, displayed displayed an increase in aggression after using Chromebooks for an extended period of time. So this was about a half an hour to 45-minute use of Chromebooks where they were uninterrupted, and there was a refusal to get off computers. There were students who were talking back to me and being quite disrespectful, and then there was also a refusal to just get off the computers when asked to come to the carpet during our chunking period of the lesson. So at the end of using computers, they didn't want to get off, as well as during the lesson. Students were observed rubbing their eyes as if it was sore after working on a type and practice application for about 20 minutes. I saw multiple students rubbing their eyes as if they were not blinking enough, causing some eye strain and eye problems. And I also noticed that the students, and now a reminder, these are grade 2 students, so 7-year-olds, sat at their desks for 35 minutes straight without requesting or showing the need to move during typing practice. Now that is unheard of. Usually I chunk up my lessons so they're only doing activities for about 10 to 15 minutes that require actual sitting down before I notice that students start getting wiggly and that they need to move on to the next activity or next idea. And that was pretty significant, that we at least doubled and even tripled the amount of time that they could sit still and be engaged with one activity. This is pretty significant, as in they're not moving at all. There was no physical movement for 35 minutes beyond moving their fingers, which is huge for a 7-year-old who's usually up and jumping around and bouncing around and walking and talking and all that sort of stuff. They were just at their computers, very quiet, working on their individual work. Great if you have a headache, not great for long-term actual physical and cognitive development for the students. I discussed some questions with 2 different teachers at my school. One of them, which was in grade, was a grade 1 teacher, and she preferred to limit students' exposure to computers to 15 minutes. So she didn't like to have anything longer than that for her students. She didn't think it was developmentally appropriate. She didn't think that students even needed to have more than 15 minutes at a time with a computer. However, in my grade 2 classroom, that grade 2 teacher no longer found it necessary to limit the students' technology exposure. We could book Chromebooks for an hour at a time, and she would let the students have that entire time to be doing lesson-oriented activities, whether it was our Google data input or doing assessments online or typing practice. However, what was interesting was that while she would not limit the students' technology in the classroom, she would in fact limit her own children's use of technology at home to 5 to 10 minute increments in order to prevent aggression. She noticed that her son, who I believe is about 4 or 5 years old, so only 2 to 3 years younger than the students she was teaching, would have a significant change in his attitude if he was exposed to or was using technology for too long. If he got the iPad for more than 10 minutes, he would start getting very frustrated or angry if someone tried to take that technology away from him, which I think is very interesting, that she would notice that in her own children but not notice it or not limit the students at school. So I really thought that I would need to put that into my own practice, that if I'm going to do it with my own kids, why is that not good enough for the students in my classroom? Because I would think that it would be very similar. It was also interesting in the conversation with this grade 2 teacher that she could tell which students at home had an overly large exposure to technology based on what the students were interested in, as well as their conversations they have. Everything was linked to the computer games or the iPad applications that they used. Everything was based on that, and they were more inclined to be okay with sitting down for long periods of time. If it was related to the computer, we always noticed a very high engagement with those students if we were using a computer, whereas they would be extremely wiggly, would not want to sit down at the carpet or do their work if there was no computer incorporated into the lesson. And I found this very interesting as well, to notice that those students that she mentioned really did not like to do anything unless it had to do with a computer. And they were very good at using the computer. One of the standouts during my computer lessons were those students as well. As I go into my teaching career, I'm going to take what I have learned from my observational study, and I noticed that I had most success with my Chromebook when the lesson was chunked, so that each session, so each time the students had to go back to their computers, was about 7 minutes or less, and then they would have to walk back to the carpet and sit down for 5 minutes, and then get that movement back in every 5 to 7 minutes. And even though it doesn't seem like very much, walking from desk to carpet to desk to carpet to desk, it is a little bit of movement. They're not looking at the screen. Their eyes are being refreshed, and they can close their eyes and blink and almost start over, just like we need to as adults in order to like refresh our eyes so that we're not overly strained and we're getting that body break built into it. So I had the most success with that. And I also need to just limit the technology use in the classroom, as parents often don't limit it at home. For certain students anyways, like there are some parents who really do limit it to 10 or 15 minutes, but there's others that once they get home, they're watching TV, they're playing video games, they have the iPad, things like that. And while it might be educational based applications such as like Raz Kids or Mathletics or things like that, it's still screen time. Even though it's educational, it's still screen time, and we need to make sure that students get the 20 minutes of sunlight playing outside after 20 minutes or 15 minutes of playing on the computer, so that they can develop those muscles, develop those brain habits, and problem solve and learn different forces of like gravity and nature and environmental processes, which brings me into following up computer time with full body or reset activities. So this can be an extra recess, which we incorporated to our computer lesson because the students just needed to get outside and not be in the classroom anymore. It could also be planning your day so that you do computers and then you have gym class, or even incorporating an extra gym class into the day if it's too cold outside. Seeing if you can coordinate that, if you have a gym specialist, or if you can book the gym for yourself, or even just doing calisthenics in your classroom. I often did this with my students, where we would have plank competitions and sit-up competitions and things like that, as 7-year-olds are often very competitive, and that way they're still doing something active, they're getting that reset activities. You can even do meditation if I find that my students are getting very aggressive and frustrated and things like that. It's good to turn everything off in the classroom, turn off the lights, turn off the smart board, so there's no hum of technology, and sit and be quiet and close your eyes and reset your brain and reset your body, so that you can start over and refocus and really become human again, and just figure out what you need in your life beyond technology. As I finish this practicum, I am really wondering, with the new questions that I have from this observation study, I'm really focusing on how I can let parents know that their child needs less tech time. I think that is a delicate and scary conversation to have with parents, because I'm intruding in these students' home life, which isn't really my job. However, these students need someone to be their champion and tell parents that their behavior during these 7 hours that I see them a day, because I see them more often than their parents do, is being affected by the amount of technology use that they have at home. And I can tell that that their behavior is different because of the technology use. So figuring out how to have those kinds of conversations with parents, while also being able to set my students up for success at school, and building in those full body or reset activities around the computer use, and really trying to chunk up my lessons and limit students' exposure. So bringing in all those implications for teaching, I really want to figure out how I can do that into my classroom. That is it for this. I found that the observational study was very eye-opening. It was very needed in my, and I think the very technology-based teaching that I am going to be doing in my future, whether I kind of want to or not. That's a lot of schools' mandates, is to become more tech forward and more tech friendly, and as we go into that, figuring out what my stance is on it. And I've really learned a lot through this observational study.